kickboxing has always been regarded as something of a second-tier professional sport. Forever in the shadow of pro boxing and more recently mixed martial arts, this dynamic style of fighting struggles to find mainstream recognition the further one travels outside of Eastern Asia. However, every now and then, the hype of a match captures the greater attention of the masses, and, however briefly, propels the sport to greater prominence. Such was the case when, in late 1992, arch-rivals Dennis Alexio and Stan Longinidis met in Australia to settle a heated feud. A capacity crowd and overwhelming media attention were present at the event, which took place on December 6 in the Melbourne Sports and Entertainment Centre. Electricity was in the air as the bell rang and the fighters advanced on each other. However, anyone expecting 10 rounds of explosive action was greatly disappointed, as the end bell rang just 15 seconds later, Alexio having fallen after receiving a single kick to the shin. His leg was fractured in 2 places. At first glance, this was an incredibly dominant victory for Longinidis, the most unfortunate night of Alexio's career, and the upset to end all upsets in kickboxing history. It also constituted one of the sport's biggest controversies and made for an anticlimax that, in hindsight, ended the heydays of both fighters and threatened to do more harm than good to kickboxing as a whole. In this video, we will examine the match, its build-up, and its aftermath. I don't intend to pass definitive judgment on the related controversy, though I will offer opinions on certain aspects. More than anything, I seek to summarize the event for people who aren't familiar with it, and place it into perspective for those who are. As we go forward, please remember that no part of this video is meant to be taken as anything other than entertainment. It has no effect on the professional standing of either fighter. The story begins with the rise to stardom of Dennis Raymond Alexio. Born in 1959, Alexio was a Tong Soo Do and Kajukenbo stylist from California, who began his professional kickboxing career in 1980. Following a TKO loss in his debut match, later overturned to a no contest, he initiated a reign of terror on the U.S. kickboxing establishment. Endowed with great strength, fearsome speed, virtually unparalleled stamina, and the ability to put hands and feet together better than almost anyone, he embarked on a knockout-laden career which, by the time he fought Stan Longinidis, had seen him capture 6 world titles under full contact rules. He was quite possibly the most dominant above-the-waist fighter in the world. His superstardom was amplified by his film career, most notably having played a major role in the Jean-Claude Van Damme cult film, Kickboxer. Nevertheless, Alexio was not exactly comfortable as champion. At a time when the quality of a fighter was increasingly being measured by their prowess in international competition and ability to defeat the best from around the world, Alexio had attracted criticism for a relatively limited scope of opponents. Bluntly, he'd been accused of building his reputation on defeating fighters who largely weren't very good. Let's examine this subject. Then and now, Alexio's fiercest critics would go as far as to claim that he never beat anyone worth mentioning, but this is neither fair nor accurate. Alexio boasted wins over fellow world champions Jeff Hollins, Mike Winkeljohn, Rob Salazar, Daryl Hennigan, and Michael McDonald among others. The previous year, he'd earned arguably his greatest victory by defeating the undisputed world heavyweight title holder, Jerry Rome. These accomplishments are nothing to scoff at. However, Alexio's record of taking on fighters universally recognized as the best in the world was less impressive. In 1984, he'd met Don Wilson in the first major challenge of his career, losing a unanimous decision after 12 hard-fought rounds. Then, just 9 months prior to the Longinidis showdown, Alexio fought European Muay Thai star Bronco Sikatish in a highly anticipated match at the World Martial Arts Championships, only for the bout to end in a controversial technical draw. While there's no denying Alexio's skill, the pressure to prove himself beyond a shadow of a doubt was there and growing. Despite his defiant public image, the champ likely recognized the need for him to defeat an internationally respected challenger and finally silence his critics. Enter Stan Longinidis. Stan was born in 1965, in Melbourne, Australia. He'd begun studying karate in 1982, after witnessing a nightclub brawl. In 1987, he initiated his professional kickboxing career by challenging Santiago Garza for the WKA World Light Heavyweight Championship. The match ended in a draw, with Garza retaining his title, but representatives from the renowned Jet Center Kickboxing Club thought Longinidis showed promise and invited him to train in California. Longinidis moved from Australia to Van Nuys and became a dominant full-time fighter. By 1990, he'd achieved his dream of becoming the first Australian world champion, and by the time he fought Alexio, he'd won a total of 3 world titles. His professional record stood at 27 wins with 1 loss and 1 draw. Like Alexio, Longinidis had stumbled only once since his first match, losing by split decision to Maurice Smith in 1991. However, he cemented his reputation the following year with a win over Alexio's old opponent, Branko Cicitic. The pressure facing Stan in the showdown was different than that resting on Dennis, Longinidis having already proved that he could compete with some of the best. The onus on him was to back up the increasingly boisterous persona that had sparked this feud. The Longinidis-Alexio rivalry was ignited in 1988, just shortly after Stan had moved to America and before he was a world champion. Following a dominant victory over Kenneth Penn to capture the Kick North American Heavyweight Championship, Longinidis aggressively called out Alexio sitting at ringside. Dennis, who was in the company of Chuck Norris and Priscilla Presley, felt embarrassed and insulted, and promptly developed a deep and vocal disdain for the Australian. The event sparked a war of words, further fueling their clash, a grudge match 4 years in the making. Losing to Alexio at this time would have constituted a serious humbling of the younger fighter. Additionally, the feud took on factional attributes. Naturally, there was the international aspect of the Australian challenging the American, a proxy conflict between their respective countries. But also, it became a matter of competition between kickboxing organizations. In the build-up to one of Longinidis' matches earlier in the year, commentators for the sanctioning World Kickboxing Association leveled harsh criticism at the International Sport Karate Association, the organization of which Alexio was world heavyweight champion. The commentators accused the ISKA of being unable to make Alexio face serious competition.
Organization, the World Kickboxing Association, it's mandatory that he would have to fight either the #1 or #2 contender to keep his title, but the association, ISKA, is a very weak organization and they're not letting that happen. They're just letting him fight bums.
In turn, Dennis downplayed Stan's accomplishments, claiming he'd only ever defeated marginal opponents, and promised to beat him soundly. In the end, it's clear that their match was expected to deliver on a lot of hype. The showdown took place as the main event of the Clash of the Titans show, promoted by Christopher Cronus and the Worldwide Kickboxing Federation. It was one of 5 matches, including a World Light Heavyweight title bout between Tosca Petridis and Mike Cole, and a World Welterweight title match between Steve Vick and Hector Pena. A World Super Lightweight title bout featuring Dita Diafat was advertised but didn't take place. At stake was the ISKA World Heavyweight Oriental Rules Championship. Alexio stood 1.80 m and weighed in at 92 kilos, while Longinidis was 1.78 m and 95 kilos. This gave Alexio a 1-inch height advantage, but Longinidis had a 7-pound weight advantage. Unconventionally for Japanese rules, Alexio had requested that they wear both the traditional full-contact karate foot pads and shin guards. The pads made it into the match, but not the shin guards. The bout was slated for 10 3-minute rounds, raising the typical round length from just 2 minutes. This was another stipulation of Alexio's, who expected the longer rounds to allow him to maintain pressure on his opponent. Alexio was paid a lucrative $100,000 to compete, while Longinidis agreed to fight for free. Alexio opened the match with a kick to his opponent's midsection. Longinidis responded with punches that missed, then connected with a kick to Alexio's lower left leg. Momentarily, the American seemed to have absorbed the blow, but then crumpled as he stepped backwards, the leg giving way beneath him. Both his tibia and fibula were broken. When Alexio failed to rise, the bell rang, and Longinidis was declared the winner via technical knockout. After years of build-up, Stan the Man had become champion in only 15 seconds. It was simultaneously the most bombastic and disappointing finish that could have happened. For the hometown hero to defeat his famous opponent with a single kick, in only a quarter minute, easily marked the highlight of Stan Longinidis' entire career. The moment immediately became iconic in kickboxing history, ensuring it would become one of the most watched matches ever. But at the same time, it was an enormous letdown for fans who had expected to see a hard-hitting technical display between two excellent athletes. Newcomers to the sport who'd been promised a titanic showdown between two exemplars of martial arts had instead been delivered a blink-and-miss-it blowout, barely longer than most sumo wrestling matches. And while there certainly were fans who attributed Stan's victory purely to his advanced skill, others called it a fluke, or otherwise noted the irony of Stan earning accolades for such an easy knockout. After all, Denis Alexio had been accused of building his reputation on a career of easy wins, but none of these came close to how easily Longinidis had just become champion. It sent mixed messages of what it meant to be a major player in professional kickboxing. All of these considerations would very soon be overshadowed by a looming controversy. The night of Alexio's defeat, his manager, karate veteran and actor Bob Wall, declared that Longinidis had won fairly, only adding that Denis's leg had been vulnerable due to a training injury. Shortly thereafter, Wall changed his position, and along with Alexio claimed that the broken leg was not the result of Stan's kick, but of Denis stepping into a hole or depression in the ring floor. Alexio supported his claim by producing footage from the day before the fight, showing him maneuvering around the ring and asking that a mat be tightened.
You're gonna tighten this, huh?
I don't know about the mat, but there's not the rope.
Yeah, they're gonna tighten the mat, and that's loose.
The claim turned into an official complaint to the ISKA organization. Wall pushed for the match result to be overturned to a no contest, but the ISKA was apprehensive about doing something which would be tantamount to declaring that a major title match hadn't happened. An investigation was launched. By the late spring of 1993, the organization's World Council Committee had reviewed the footage of the fight but not reached a conclusion. The ringside physician, who had initially declared that it was impossible for Alexio's spiral fracture to have been caused by a kick, later amended his statement and claimed that the kick could, in fact, have contributed to the fall which led to the fracture. With no clear decision forthcoming, the world title was officially placed in dispute, pending a rematch. The topic of a hole in the ring deserves some discussion, beginning with an understanding of how a modern boxing ring is constructed. In short, a steel frame is erected, upon which are laid wooden panels that constitute the base surface of the ring. Over this are laid protective mats, which are finally covered by a canvas and fastened with rope. It seems as though Alexio's claim of a depression refers to the protective surface between the canvas and panels. The veracity of Alexio's claim is, essentially, unknowable. The footage doesn't provide an obvious answer. Even when zooming in on the area from multiple angles, it's unclear whether there definitely is or definitely isn't a depression. Is it possible that Alexio's claim is true? Yes. Is there any way for us to know, beyond reasonable doubt? Probably not. The issue remains a matter of contention. That said, the notion of a hole in the ring tends to overlook that the Alexio Longinidis match wasn't the only fight of the night. At least 4 previous matches had taken place, with apparently none of their participants complaining of any sort of ring malfunction. Additionally, Alexio's claim took on a more conspiratorial nature in January 1994.
The Australians over there tried to pull some shenanigans and, state that I broke my leg by blocking a kick, and they tried to, pull a fast one and take one of my world titles.
Stan wouldn't have much time to enjoy the title, disputed or not. As per the original match contract, the loser had the right to a rematch, but such a contest would have to be scheduled no later than September 1, 1993. Though Black Belt magazine reported in October that a rematch had been set for December 4 of the same year, the fight contract had apparently remained unsigned by the due date, thereby forcing Longinidis to vacate the title. A rematch between the two never took place. The ISKA championship wasn't vacant for long. In December 1993, Japanese karate superstar Masaaki Satake won the belt in a match against U.S. fighter Jeff Hollins, one of Dennis Alexio's old rivals. Since then, it's gone on to be held by Maurice Smith, Paul Slowinski, and Peter Graham, among others. The controversy surrounding the supposed hole in the ring was never satisfactorily put to rest. Eventually, the U.S. division of the ISKA seemed to accept Alexio's account, and changed their original ruling to a no contest. However, the Australian ISKA division and the co-sanctioning World Kickboxing Association upheld the original verdict. Consequently, Stan Longinidis now has the rare distinction of being recognized as a former champion by one branch of a major kickboxing organization, but not its sister branch. It is unclear whether there will ever be a proper reconciliation. Ironically, the night in Melbourne marked the end of Stan Longinidis' heyday as a kickboxing superstar. Even though he still had accomplishments ahead of him, they were arguably less bombastic and definitely more interspersed by setbacks. In 1993, he became the first major international star to sign with K1, but even though he was entered into the 1995 World Grand Prix tournament, he lost spectacularly to Mike Bernardo in the quarterfinals. In 1994, he won an international tournament in Australia which placed him on the same level as many K1 regional champions, but lost a second tournament the following year with a controversial defeat to fellow Australian, Sam Greco. In 1996, he won the inaugural WMC World Super Heavyweight Championship in Pattaya, and was presented the belt by King Rama IX of Thailand, but lost it about 5 months later to Andy Hoog. He'd go on to boast wins over the likes of Peter Graham, Musashi and Sadao Kiyosongrit, but lost no less than 3 world championships in a single 1995 match to Jeff Rufus. While Longinidis had established himself to the point that he's unlikely to be forgotten, his record after 1992 is hardly comparable to his glory days, when he truly was Stan the Man. However, if Stan Longinidis' career trajectory leveled off in the aftermath of the Clash of the Titans, it's still nothing compared to the damage symbolically done to Dennis Alexio. While the American recovered from his broken leg within 8 months and was undefeated in another 6 years of fighting, the match had irreparably harmed his reputation. The Longinidis bout effectively removed Alexio from consideration as the world's best fighter. Despite claiming an additional 2 world championships and winning all 15 of his subsequent victories by knockout, Alexio never overcame the stigma of being someone who couldn't compete with the sport's elite. though his later victories included wins over world champions like Gordon Miners, Mark Russell and Anthony Elmore. He never again found himself sharing the ring with top-ranked international fighters. Alexio fought what appears to have been his last match in December 1999, but it seems as though he never officially announced his retirement. In late 2003, the IKF decided to vacate his World Heavyweight Championship, after he failed to return their calls over the course of 5 months. 2003 also seems to be the year that Alexio's life began a downward spiral, his kickboxing accomplishments becoming overshadowed by legal troubles and increasingly erratic behavior. Between then and 2007, Alexio had been charged with bank fraud and failure to pay child support, and had been arrested for bank fraud and failure to answer a federal subpoena. During this time, he claimed not to be the person named in his arrest warrant and claimed that his public defenders didn't speak for him. In 2013, Alexio was arrested again and charged with a slew of financial crimes, eventually being found guilty on 28 counts of tax fraud, theft and money laundering. Alexio was reported as being disruptive during the court proceedings, and refused to leave his cell to attend sentencing. He was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, which he is currently serving at the FCI Beaumont facility in Texas. He is slated to be released in July 2028. Regardless of his personal life, Alexio deserves recognition for what was still a wildly successful fighting career. He held at least 8 world championships across 3 different weight divisions, and knocked out at least 17 former, current or future world champions. He was one of the most famous and celebrated full-contact kickboxers to ever compete, and his skill in the ring was beyond question. His professional record, depending on the source, stands at either 68 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw with 3 no contests, or 68 wins with 2 losses, 1 draw and 2 no contests. Stan Longinidis' later life was less sensational. He retired twice, once in 2000 and then for good in 2003. Since leaving competition, he and his brother George have opened a fitness academy in Blackburn, Victoria. Stan also works as a motivational and keynote speaker. He remains a public figure in Australia. Looking back at his career, Longinidis was without a doubt one of the best kickboxers of the late 80s and early 90s. He not only raised the level of competition for the upper weight divisions, but helped popularize low kick fighting in North America, thereby modernizing a sport which had become outdated in one of its primary places of practice. Though he never established himself as the king of K1, his presence helped legitimize the federation in its early days, and through his competition, he helped cement many stars of the decade. He won at least 9 world championships across 3 weight divisions and 4 rule sets, defeating at least 13 world champions in the process. While his record doesn't seem to have been accurately documented, I estimate that it stands at 88 wins, 10 losses, 5 draws and 1 no contest. Alternatively, it could also be 87 wins and 2 no contests. Dennis Alexio would probably think so.